During the Second World War, thousands of young men volunteered to serve on submarines on all warring sides. Submarines were the modern lords of the depths, weapons that crept beneath the sea's surface, could strike without warning, and then vanish again. That image drew in the brave, the adventure-hungry, and those eager to step beyond the usual conventions of naval service. Submarine flotillas had the reputation of elite units. They recruited only the most determined and best trained. The promise of adventure in the dark ocean depths and the chance to deliver a sudden blow to the enemy proved a powerful magnet. Many of them, however, soon discovered a harsh truth. Life inside the narrow steel hull of a submarine was anything but romantic. Instead of glory and adventure, they found a cramped prison deep below the surface, constant danger, and both physical and mental suffering. Submarine duty was among the hardest and most merciless that war could offer. Can you imagine spending weeks sealed in a metal cylinder where you cannot even freely breathe fresh air, cannot take a shower, and where any hour might be your last? That was the fate awaiting submarine crews. During the Second World War, thousands of young men volunteered to serve on submarines on all warring sides. Submarines were the modern lords of the depths, weapons that crept beneath the sea's surface, could strike without warning, and then vanish again. That image drew in the brave, the adventure-hungry, and those eager to step beyond the usual conventions of naval service. Submarine flotillas had the reputation of elite units. They recruited only the most determined and best trained. The promise of adventure in the dark ocean depths and the chance to deliver a sudden blow to the enemy proved a powerful magnet. Many of them, however, soon discovered a harsh truth. Life inside the narrow steel hull of a submarine was anything but romantic. Instead of glory and adventure, they found a cramped prison deep below the surface, constant danger, and both physical and mental suffering. Submarine duty was among the hardest and most merciless that war could offer. Can you imagine spending weeks sealed in a metal cylinder where you cannot even freely breathe fresh air, cannot take a shower, and where any hour might be your last? That was the fate awaiting submarine crews. In the Second World War, submarines were both a deadly weapon and a strategic trump card. German U-boats, short for Unterseeboot, stalked the Atlantic hunting Allied convoys, while American and British submarines operated in the Pacific or the Mediterranean. The commander of Germany's submarine force, Admiral Karl Dönitz, called his crews "Grey Wolves," and indeed, in the early years of the war, his wolf packs ruthlessly destroyed enemy ships. Attacks came suddenly from the depths, often at night, and at first submariners enjoyed the aura of elusive ocean predators. As the war dragged on, the time of relatively easy victories ended. The Allied fleet improved its defenses. Convoys received stronger escorts. Better sonar and radar appeared. Aircraft armed with depth charges joined the hunt. Submarines gradually turned from hunters into prey, and each new patrol became more dangerous than the last. Triumphs gave way to grim reality. Submarines were simultaneously among the most dangerous places a soldier could serve. The statistics speak plainly. Submarine service carried the highest loss of life. Of every 100 submariners, roughly 75 never saw the end of the war, or their homeland, again. They died in the depths of the sea. For young men entering the submarine arm, this meant the odds of surviving several long patrols were ominously low. Even so, enough brave or resolute souls accepted the challenge. Submarines were a technical compromise between size and stealth, large enough to carry crew, fuel, and torpedoes for long cruises, yet small and agile enough to dive quickly and slip away from enemies. In practice, Designers sacrificed every comfort. A typical mid-sized German submarine, the type WWII, was about 77 meters long and only 6 meters wide, with a pressure hull diameter of roughly 5 meters. Inside this steel cylinder, whose habitable volume equaled just a few railway cars, more than 50 men had to function. Every corner was filled with engines, batteries, torpedoes, fuel tanks, and other equipment. Space for the crew was minimal, literally squeezed between steel bulkheads and the machinery needed for survival and combat. In such confines, the crew, including the torpedo man, had the barest room to live and move. So what exactly did the torpedo man do, and how crucial was he to a boat's success? A typical wartime submarine carried around 40-60 men, including officers. All were packed into a claustrophobic environment, where every member had a precisely defined role. The captain, the Kapitänleutnant in German usage, was the brain of the operation, and the only one with a full picture of the situation and orders. Around him worked a small cadre of officers. The first officer, executive officer, the navigator, and the chief engineer, who helped run the ship. Below them were petty officers and sailors, among them the torpedo man. The torpedo man was responsible for the boat's main armament, the torpedoes and everything connected with them. He kept the tubes in perfect order, cared for stored torpedoes, and prepared them for firing. When the attack order came, torpedo men hoisted the heavy torpedoes into the tubes with blocks and tackle, secured them carefully, and set running depth and detonators according to the commander's instructions. It was physically exhausting, high-stakes work. A single torpedo weighed around 1.5 tons, and any mistake in handling could endanger the entire boat. Loading and ramming a torpedo into one tube could take even an experienced crew many minutes. In rough seas or battle, it demanded near superhuman effort. A poorly secured torpedo could break free on a hard roll and cause an accident. Torpedo men also maintained the torpedo's complex mechanisms, gyroscopes, batteries in electric torpedoes, compressed air bottles in older models, so the weapon would work reliably in the moment of truth. A torpedo was itself a sophisticated machine, a nearly 7-meter underwater projectile weighing over 2 tons, packed with hundreds of kilograms of explosives and able to run several kilometers underwater at high speed. Of course, torpedo men were not the only specialists on board. Crews were a motley mix of trades. The captain bore full responsibility and alone saw the broader picture. The first officer handled navigation and attack tactics and supervised execution of orders. The navigator, Obersteuermann, fixed positions, courses, and charts, often doubling as supply officer. The torpedo officer planned torpedo attacks and firing solutions and oversaw torpedo readiness with the torpedoman. Machinists tended the diesel and electric engines and repaired breakdowns. The radio man received and sent encrypted messages. The sonar operator listened on hydrophones for enemy propellers or falling depth charges. Deck gunners manned the deck gun and AA weapons when surfaced. Others stood bridge watches, helped at the helm, handled ammunition, cooked, and cleaned. Beyond their specialties, sailors were cross-trained. There was no room for single-skill men. A torpedo man might help with a hurried engine repair or man pumps when the boat leaked. Versatility was survival. Discipline and drill were vital. At battle stations or sudden alarm, everyone had to be instantly at his post. In combat, torpedo men took their places in the bow by the tubes, ready to unleash the iron fish, as torpedoes were nicknamed. Work under battle stress was often done by touch and memory under dim emergency lighting while the whole boat shook with shots and vibration. Success, or rescue, depended on their skill and speed. Next, we'll see the cramped conditions in which these men worked and lived, and what it meant to share such a tiny space with dozens of others. Anyone stepping into a submarine for the first time was shocked by how tight it was. Space was used to the last centimeter for machinery and weapons. Only the bare minimum remained for people. Passageways were so narrow that two men could barely squeeze past each other. Every centimeter was precious, and the crew was literally packed in like sardines. There were no cabins in the usual sense. Men slept, ate, and rested wherever there was room. Most crewmen did not even have their own bunk. There were usually fewer bunks than men, so they practiced hot bunking. As soon as one sailor crawled out of a narrow bunk, another slid in. The bunk was thus constantly warmed by a body. Typically, 3 men shared 2 bunks in shifts, sleeping in short snatches between duties, often fitfully. An 8-hour quiet sleep was an unknown luxury. The environment was anything but quiet, even at rest. Engines droned, the hull creaked, pumps and fans thumped. True silence didn't exist. Gear had to be at hand, so instruments, cables, tools, and personal items crowded around bunks and tables. Each man had only a small locker or bag for his belongings. Privacy did not exist. Everything happened in full view of comrades. The captain alone usually had a miniature cabin, curtained off, barely fitting a bunk and a folding chart table. The rest slept wherever they could. In the forward compartment beside the torpedoes, in bunks slung in passageways, or on the deck plates near the tubes. In the bow torpedo room, bunks literally hung over torpedoes ready to fire. Torpedomen slept with steel fish at their elbows. Life in such pressurized proximity meant the crew knew each other very well, perhaps too well. Every rustle, every sigh, every snore was audible. They had to learn mutual tolerance and respect, or the boat would soon be riven by quarrels. Yet submariners later recalled exceptionally strong comradeship. Shared suffering and absolute dependence forged brother-like bonds. On shore, the bustle and open spaces of civilization could feel alien. They were so used to their tight underwater world that they became a well-oiled submarine family. There were comic sides to such cramped living. In heavy seas, the boat rolled. Everyone had to keep one hand braced to avoid tumbling from bunk or bench. Sudden lurches could trigger a chain reaction, sailors falling onto one another like dominoes. Constant closeness bred pranks, a charcoal mustache drawn on a sleeping face, a harmless trick to amuse the crew. These small jokes bled off tension from constant stress. Humor was one of the few effective shields against submarine depression and despair. As for hygiene and personal comfort, one word: awful. Crews sailed for weeks with no chance for a real bath or shower. On German Type 7 or 9th boats, there was no shower at all, and only one toilet for dozens of men. And early in a patrol, it often served as a food storeroom. Men wore the same clothes for the entire mission, soon saturated with sweat, salt water, and diesel. Within days, a stench reigned that would have staggered even a hardened sailor. A heavy mix of sweat, oil, mold, and battery fumes. Every breath inside the boat was a small test of endurance. Deodorants or cologne were no help. Men sometimes wiped themselves with rags soaked in alcohol or seawater. Fresh water was too precious. Shaving happened rarely, if water allowed. Many returned from patrols bearded like castaways. One technician from U-505 recalled that during a 68-day patrol, he never took off his work clothes and only occasionally wiped himself with alcohol to remove the worst grime. Such conditions sound unimaginable today, but for submariners they were routine. From the diary of a German submariner. 14th day at sea. I no longer remember how fresh air smells. Everywhere reeks of oil and sweat. My beard grows, but there's no point shaving. There's nothing to shave with. Water is too precious. I only wipe my sweaty skin with spirits. The crew jokes I'm like overripe cheese. Better not to think how we all stink. Maybe a man can get used to it. He must. The toilet was a problem of its own. Early in patrol, it might be stuffed with potatoes, boxes of lemons, and other stores. Even once cleared, using it was not simple. The high-pressure flushing system had to force contents out against sea pressure. Mishandling could be disastrous. History records a case where improper use led to flooding part of a submarine. Strict procedures governed its use, and men often waited for the right moment, best on the surface when it could be rinsed safely with seawater. Otherwise, they had to endure or use makeshift containers. Unsurprisingly, smell was ever present and normal hygiene a distant memory. Temperature and climate posed another challenge. In the tropics, unbearable heat and humidity ruled. In the engine room, temperatures could exceed 40 degrees Celsius. In the North Atlantic winter, cold seeped in. Condensation dripped from bulkheads onto the crew. Ventilation and heating were limited. When submerged, air quality steadily worsened. CO2 rose, oxygen fell, causing fatigue, headaches, and malaise. Every chance to surface was welcomed not only for fresh air, but also to vent the foul stench accumulated within. Sailors said that after weeks below, the crew's smell could be sensed 100 meters away when the boat moored. Despite all this, bodies adapted. Men stopped noticing their own smell and learned to maintain basic hygiene as best they could. The rule was, weapons and instruments must be immaculate. Your body could slide, but a torpedo or an engine had to work perfectly. This harsh routine taught endurance. Food on a submarine was full of paradoxes. Sub-crews had the reputation of the best rations in the fleet. Shore officers tried to give them the best, knowing the brutal conditions ahead. Before departure, boats were crammed with provisions. Crates of tinned food in every free corner, sacks of potatoes, casks of water, and more. One surviving inventory shows a German boat carrying for a 12-week cruise more than a ton of fresh and smoked meat, nearly 2 tons of canned meat, 3.5 tons of potatoes, hundreds of kilos of vegetables and fruit, eggs, fresh bread, and sweets. U-boats even stocked lemons and limes against scurvy. American submarines in the Pacific were famous for generous fare, fresh meat, coffee, even an ice cream maker. In the first days after sailing, crews could feast almost royally, albeit improvisationally. But fresh goods spoiled quickly in heat and humidity, and diesel fumes permeated even bread and fruit. Refrigeration was small and insufficient, so fresh food, bread, vegetables, fruit, eggs, meat, was consumed first. Salamis and hams hung between torpedoes, tins rolled underfoot, loaves were stashed even in the engine spaces. Day by day, something was eaten and a little storage space freed. After a week or two, only long-keeping stores remained. Canned goods, pickled vegetables, cured meats, hardtack, rice, and pasta. The cook performed small miracles to turn monotonous supplies into hearty meals. Morale depended on his skill. As war wore on, supply quality fell. Substitutes like soy flour crept into German menus, lowering quality. By the end, even submarine crews lost their remaining culinary comforts. Cooking happened in a tiny galley wedged between living spaces, a couple of burners and a small oven, yet 3 hot meals a day, simple but calorie-dense. A German day might be breakfast of coffee, malt drink, or tea, hardtack with butter, Perhaps jam or honey, and eggs, lunch of soup, stewed meat with potatoes or pasta and vegetables, a piece of fruit, supper often cold, sausage or canned fish, cheese, bread, tea. Americans and Britons ate similarly, with more fresh produce early in patrols and luxuries like ice cream or juices that Germans lacked. The key was enough, and nourishing food. Even without much physical movement, stress and irregular schedules burned energy. Fresh water was strategic. Boats often had desalination units, but limited output. Much of the distilled water went to batteries and cooking. Strict rationing applied. On one U-boat, a 5-day allowance per man was roughly half a bucket, for drinking and minimal hygiene. Men drank plenty of tea and coffee brewed from distilled water, saving every drop. Barrels of lemonade or beer might be carried, especially on German boats, for morale. Tea was strong and black. Alcohol was not officially served, but on special occasions, Christmas or after a successful sinking, the captain might issue a symbolic sip of rum or cognac. Discipline had to be maintained. At any moment, battle stations could sound. Meals were not just physical necessity, but psychological support. Moments when the crew gathered, briefly forgot the danger, and enjoyed something warm. They ate in haste, bowls held to keep contents from sloshing with the boat's roll. Still, jokes were traded, and laughter helped morale. The old saying, "An army marches on its stomach," held beneath the sea as well. A well-fed torpedoman handled stress better than a hungry, exhausted one. From a cook's letter home. Today we finally ate the last egg. I had to boil it with onions and divide it among the whole watch. The lads thought it a feast. Tomorrow it's only tins and hardtack. They ask for fresh bread, but that ran out 10 days ago. The vegetables rotted a week back. The potatoes turned to mush. But keep your chin up. I still have a bar of chocolate hidden. I'm saving it for Christmas. Not every day was action. In reality, long hours and days of monotonous sailing, waiting, and repeated tasks dominated. The crew was split into watches so the boat could function 24 hours a day, often 3 8-hour rotations. One on duty, one on standby, one trying to sleep curled on a bunk. Specialists like machinists or radio men sometimes rotated in shorter intervals, 4 hours by day, 6 at night, to preserve alertness. Daily routine included checks and maintenance, greasing diesels, monitoring batteries, verifying torpedo safeties and tube breaches. Cleanliness, at least of machinery, mattered. Scrubbing decks, wiping oil to prevent accidents. Drills were regular, especially crash dive practice, a core maneuver. At the sighting of a plane or ship, the boat had to drop to safe depth in seconds. Men trained to clear loose gear, slam hatches, and leap to stations while the submarine plunged. Drills were exhausting, but in crisis they saved lives. For long stretches, though, boredom ruled. With no target to track in mid-ocean, some had little to do beyond essentials. There was no room for sport or pacing. The periscope often showed only endless water. Free moments meant talk, cards or dice, books if any, diaries and letters, posted only after return. Sometimes the monotony broke with unique experiences. In absolute silence below the surface, the crew heard the sea's strange sounds. Whales' long songs resonating in the steel hull, or the squeaks of cetaceans. These concerts from the deep reminded them of other life in the darkness, and for a time, distracted minds from the omnipresent threat. Some boats had a gramophone and a few records, opera arias or popular jazz. On U-505, they say jazz played so often, the crew learned English lyrics by heart. Music chased away gloom and strain. A man with a harmonica or guitar could keep spirits up. When boats surfaced to refresh air and charge batteries with the diesels, men grabbed a few minutes on deck. In tropical waters, some even dared a quick swim around the boat under the captain's eye. A brief plunge under the blazing Caribbean sun was a welcome boost. These flashes of humanity amid a hostile ocean gave strength to endure more weeks of isolation. Holidays were celebrated as best they could be. On Christmas Eve 1941, one German crew set up a small tree in the control room with electric candles and sang carols softly. An intimate moment of peace and unity in wartime that gave hope. Life on a submarine was isolated informationally as well. Cut off from the world, the crew had no news from home and little sense of the war's course beyond terse radio orders, intensifying the feeling of detachment from reality. Thoughts of family alternated with absolute focus on the present. Any diversion, a small game or conversation, was worth its weight in gold for mental balance. Medical care was a chapter of its own. There was usually no doctor aboard, only a medic with a limited kit. An acute appendicitis could be critical. Either turn back early or improvise. One American boat recorded an emergency appendectomy performed by a petty officer medic with a few sailors assisting, saving a life. Heroism not under fire, but demanding immense courage and composure. A death aboard weighed heavily on morale. The body might be stored in an improvised cold space, or if possible, buried at sea. Everyone knew that if the boat was sunk, all would likely perish. A grim thought they learned to live with. Days flowed by. Routine duties, snatched sleep, modest food, endless waiting, until the alarm bell suddenly rang and everything accelerated. Now slip into a torpedoman's skin at the moment of attack. When a target was detected, the entire crew snapped to battle readiness. The captain issued orders in a whisper so as not to betray the boat. The helmsman eased the submarine into the ideal firing position. The torpedo officer quickly computed course and range while torpedomen in the bow prepared the weapons, cracked inner breeches, and waited. Fire! And the torpedoman pressed the button, admitting compressed air to the tube and launching the torpedo. The boat shuddered slightly as the mass left the bow. For the torpedomen, this was the culmination of their labor. The iron fish sped toward the unsuspecting ship along a pre-calculated track. On board, the tensest seconds of all followed, waiting for the explosion. After firing, the boat usually changed depth and turned away to avoid reprisal. Men held their breath as seconds crawled. A distant thud rolled through the water, hit. Sometimes, however, there was no blast. A dud detonator meant only a far-off thumping. Carefully crafted attacks could fail through technical fault. When a hit came, word spread and smiles flickered on exhausted faces. Triumph lasted only moments. Almost immediately, a new threat loomed. Escort destroyers and patrol craft began hunting the invisible attacker below. The captain ordered ultra-quiet. Engines stopped, lights dimmed, whispers only, soft steps. The boat slipped as deep as possible, often beyond design, safe depth, to evade sonar and surface attack. Hunter became hunted. There was nothing for torpedo men and others to do but wait, quiet and disciplined. They sat at their stations, controlling ragged breathing and pounding hearts. In the hush, only instruments and the distant ping of enemy sonar combing the water could be heard. Then came the counterattack. A far-off rumble tore the silence. A first depth charge exploded somewhere nearby. A warning. Seconds later, another, closer. The shock wave rattled the entire boat. Bulbs flickered or burst. Fine leaks opened along piping. Men clawed for handholds and hunched their heads between their shoulders. Then hell began. Depth charges detonated in series. Inside, it was like being locked in a steel barrel someone smashed with a giant hammer. Sounds penetrated, metal groaned, rivets creaked, dishes and tools flew from shelves. In the red emergency light, the torpedomen saw frozen faces, each man wrestling with terror. Training and morale now mattered. No one could panic. A single scream and dash could endanger all. Hearts pounded. Men sat or lay at posts, white as sheets, fingers locked round handrails, silently counting blasts. "Hold fast!" the commander sometimes called over the intercom to steady the crew. The torpedo men checked that fish were still secured. Machinists tried to mitigate damage on the fly. Tighten valves, stem trickles, snuff sparks. After minutes of bombardment, a pause. Perhaps the worst moment. Silence after the roar while all waited. Would the next pattern come? Air smelled of hot electrics and chlorine from spilled batteries. Some retched from stress and rolling. Others prayed under their breath. No one knew if they would leave this hell alive. Attacks could last an hour. Patterns of charges, tense quiet, then blasts again. Many later said the worst was not fear of death itself, but the waiting and helplessness. Any single explosion could be the end. A fatal hull rupture and flooding. They knew that if the boat was badly damaged, odds of rescue were negligible. Still, discipline ordered them to endure. Tight-knit comrades gave courage with glances, brief words, hand squeezes. When charges finally ceased and enemy sonar stopped, the boat lay motionless for long minutes. No one wanted to move until certain the hunters had gone. Only after enough time had passed and the thrum of destroyers' screws faded came the order to creep up to periscope depth. The submarine was battered but alive. A collective exhale of relief filled the interior. They had slipped the gravedigger this time. Eyes shone with tears of exhaustion and gratitude. Surfacing later, the bridge watch gulped fresh air for the first time in hours. Survived, this time. Experiences like these left permanent marks. Many confessed that nightmares returned after such attacks. Some began to believe in fate or miracles, considering survival in the depths a second birth. Submariners' fate bound immense courage to the cruel lottery of war. A torpedo officer's post-war memory. When the depth charges fell on us, I felt the boat shiver and leap. At one point I accepted it was the end. Then silence. I will never forget the feeling when we finally surfaced and I could see the sky. It was like being born again. Similar hells were endured on the other side as well, by Allied submariners. Conditions on British, American, or Soviet submarines often resembled the Germans. Cramped space, poor hygiene, and risks unique to underwater war. There were differences. American Gato and Balao-class boats in the Pacific were somewhat larger, with crews around 80 and better air conditioning, a blessing in tropical heat. Their food was famed. Some boats carried ice cream machines and ample fresh stores. But long Pacific patrols could last 60 days or more, comparable to or longer than German Atlantic patrols. British boats, especially smaller types in the Mediterranean, had smaller crews and very Spartan conditions, closer to U-boats. No air conditioning, no luxuries. Soviet submariners in the Arctic and Baltic suffered from cold, crowding, and outdated equipment. Tragedy could strike allies through technical failure or bad luck. The most successful U.S. submarine USS Tang sank dozens of Japanese ships, but in October 1944 was destroyed by her own torpedo, which circled back due to a malfunction and hit the boat. Only a few men survived using emergency breathing gear to escape the sinking wreck. On every side, submarine service was extraordinarily risky, and chance often decided. The level of threat was similar for all. Once detected, any submarine fell under a devastating rain of depth charges, but survival odds differed. By war's end, German missions bordered on suicidal. Only about a quarter of German submariners lived to see peace. U.S. losses were lower, roughly 1 in 5 submariners. British figures were similar, still horrific, yet markedly better than in the German fleet. Better late-war Allied technology, more effective rescues, and the fact that Allied boats often hunted isolated Japanese ships or worked at the edges of battlefields, while U-boats charged heavily guarded Atlantic convoys, played their roles. A British submariner's 1943 note: "We've been at sea 6 weeks. It feels like the world above has ceased to exist. We haven't seen sun or stars for weeks. Each day we get a mug of strong tea, our only comfort. Tea and humor keep us sane. We all stink like cattle. Some lads have nasty rashes. But, as the captain says, better stink than death. What matters is the ship keeps going, and the torpedoes are ready." In essence, the brutal life of a submariner had similar contours on all sides. Endless days in darkness below the surface, without comfort and under daily threat of violent death. Whether a torpedo man on German U-99 in the Atlantic or his foe on American USS Tang in the Pacific, both shared extraordinary physical and mental strain. Memories many carried to the grave, if they were lucky enough to survive the war. Whatever flag they served, they became, after the war, a kind of brotherhood. Kindred spirits forever linked by extreme experiences from the ocean depths. When, after weeks at sea, a submarine returned to base, it felt like re-entering another world. Men climbed out through the hatch, often pale, gaunt, uniforms faded, many bearded. After weeks in the gloom, daylight stabbed their eyes. Fresh air tingled intoxicatingly in their lungs. At last, they were back in the living world. Ports greeted them with triumphal arches. Flotilla commanders honored them. Propaganda hailed their sinkings. The torpedo man and his mates headed first to showers and baths to scrub off a month of sweat and salt, then to hearty fresh food, and not least, a cold beer or vodka for courage. After each war patrol, they were entitled to a few days' leave, some spent in raucous celebration, others simply catching up on sleep in a quiet bed ashore. Families barely recognized the returnees. The tanned, robust youths who had sailed out came back thin, pale, hollow-eyed, marked by the depths. Shore rest was brief. The war machine demanded new sorties. Many who survived several patrols went out again and again, fully aware luck does not last. With each assignment, the risk of remaining in the depths grew. The psychological toll mounted. Records tell of veterans withdrawn from service for nervous collapse, what the German Navy called submarine sickness, not to be confused with decompression illness, a state of exhaustion and breakdown from prolonged stress in confinement. Those afflicted were reassigned to shore duty, sometimes stigmatized by harsher commanders. Most crews, however, endured with astonishing courage to the bitter end. History records much heroism among submarine crews of all nations and their enormous losses. Of the tens of thousands who served on submarines in the Second World War, a great many never came home. When a boat was destroyed, its entire company usually perished with it. Chances of escape or rescue were tiny. Only exceptionally did individuals get out of a sinking submarine and were saved. The majority shared their ship's fate. Their sacrifice has not been forgotten. Today, Several famous submarines of that era serve as museums. For example, German U-505 is exhibited in Chicago, British HMS Alliance in Gosport, American USS Cod in Cleveland. Visitors can walk the tight compartments and feel a fraction of what torpedo men and their comrades experienced. Modern submarines, especially giant nuclear boats, are far larger, quieter, and more comfortable. They have air conditioning, plants to produce oxygen and distill water, freezers with ample food, even small gyms or relaxation corners. Crews can shower, change clothes regularly, and eat more varied meals. Yet life under the sea remains demanding. It still requires endurance, discipline, and a willingness to live for long weeks isolated from the world. Today's strategic submarines may remain submerged for months at a time, putting heavy demands on the crew's psyche, even if technology grants far more comfort than their predecessors had. The stories of torpedo men remain both inspiration and warning. An inspiration in that human courage and resolve can overcome seemingly insurmountable conditions. A warning of how brutal war can be and what extremes people must endure. We may admire their heroism from a distance, and also wish that no one ever again has to live under such harsh conditions. The life of a torpedo man on a submarine in the Second World War was short, extraordinarily brutal, and at the edge of human capability. For that very reason, we should not forget the stories of these wolves of the deep. Thank you for diving with us today into the depths of their lives. If this video interested you, I'd be glad if you gave it a like and shared it with friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating histories. Thank you for your attention, and have a wonderful day.